Working the night shift means you're alone when most people are asleep. And sometimes, you're not as alone as you think.
My name's Marcus, I'm 26, and I work overnight as a parking attendant at a downtown parking garage. It's one of those old concrete structures, 6 levels, maybe 300 spots total. Most of the spaces are empty by the time my shift starts at 11 p.m., just a handful of cars belonging to people working late or staying at nearby hotels. The booth where I work is on the ground level, right by the entrance gate. It's small, just enough room for a chair, a computer, and a little space heater that barely works. There's a window facing the entrance and another facing into the garage. I can see the first 2 levels from where I sit, but everything above that is just concrete ramps and shadows. Usually my nights are dead boring. I sit there, scroll through my phone, maybe watch some videos. Cars come in and out maybe once every hour or two. The gate beeps, I check the ticket or scan their pass, and they drive off. That's it. This happened about 3 months ago on a Saturday night. It was around 1:30 a.m. when a silver sedan pulled up to the gate. The driver was a woman, maybe in her 30s, and she looked stressed. She rolled down her window and told me her car was making a weird noise and she needed somewhere safe to park it overnight while she figured out what to do. I told her no problem, gave her a ticket, and raised the gate. She drove in and I watched her taillights disappear up the ramp to the 2nd level. About 10 minutes later, she walked back down to the booth. She asked if there was a number she could call for a tow truck, and I gave her the card we keep taped to the window. She thanked me and said she'd wait in her car while she made some calls. I sat back down and went back to scrolling on my phone. Maybe 20 minutes passed when I heard footsteps echoing down from the upper levels. Heavy steps, like boots on concrete. I looked up and saw a guy walking down the ramp from the 3rd level. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a black jacket and jeans. He had his hands in his pockets and his head was down. When he got to the bottom of the ramp, instead of heading toward the exit, he turned and walked back up to the 2nd level. I thought that was weird, but figured maybe he forgot something in his car. A few minutes later, I heard the footsteps again. He came back down the same ramp, turned around at the bottom, and went back up. Then he did it again and again. By the 4th time, I was watching him on the security monitor. The camera on the 2nd level showed him walking the entire floor, passing by every single car, then circling back and doing it again. At one point, he stopped in front of the silver sedan where the woman was sitting and just stood there. He didn't approach it, didn't knock on the window. He just stood about 10 feet away, facing the car. My stomach dropped. I picked up the phone and called the number the woman had given me when she filled out the parking slip, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't know what else to do, so I called my supervisor. He didn't answer either. I kept watching the monitor. The guy finally moved away from the car and walked up to the 3rd level. I switched cameras and saw him doing the same thing up there, walking the rows, stopping occasionally, then moving again. Around 2:15 a.m., I saw the woman get out of her car. She started walking toward the ramp to come back down to the booth. That's when I saw the guy on the monitor. He was standing at the top of the ramp on the 3rd level, looking down at the 2nd level where she was walking. I grabbed the phone and called her number again. This time she picked up. I told her there was a guy in the garage acting strange and that she should get back in her car and lock the doors. She sounded confused but said okay, and I watched her turn around and walk back. I kept my eyes on the monitor. The guy started walking down the ramp, slowly. He reached the 2nd level and walked in the direction of her car. I called her again and told her I was calling the police. She whispered that she could see someone outside her car. I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send someone. While I was on the phone, I saw the guy on the monitor walk around to the driver's side of her car and just stand there. He bent down slightly like he was looking in through the window. Then he reached out and tried the door handle. It didn't open. He tried it again. Then he walked around to the passenger side and tried that door too. I yelled into the phone to the dispatcher that he was trying to get into her car. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were 2 minutes away. I felt completely helpless sitting in that booth. I could see everything happening on the monitor, but there was nothing I could do. The guy stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 30 seconds. Then he backed away from the car and walked toward the ramp leading up to the 4th level. He disappeared from the camera. 2 minutes later, I saw the flashing lights. 2 police cars pulled up to the entrance, and I buzzed the gate open immediately. 4 officers got out, and I pointed them toward the second level. They ran up the ramps with their flashlights and radios crackling. I watched the monitors as they checked every level. They found the woman still locked in her car and escorted her down. Then they kept searching. One of the officers came back to the booth and asked me if there was any other way out of the garage besides the main entrance. I told him there was an emergency exit stairwell on the 6th level that led to the street on the other side of the building. He radioed the other officers and they ran up. A few minutes later, one of them came back and said the door was propped open with a brick. The guy was gone. They took a statement from the woman and from me. They checked the cameras and got a decent shot of his face, but I don't know if they ever found him. The woman was shaken up, but okay. She thanked me before she left with the officers. After they all left, I sat in that booth for the rest of my shift feeling completely on edge. Every shadow looked like someone standing there. Every little sound made me jump. The worst part was knowing that guy had been up there for who knows how long before I even noticed him. And I kept thinking, what if she had gotten out of her car before I saw him on the camera? What if he'd gotten to her before the cops arrived?
I still work there, but now I check every single level on the cameras every 10 minutes, and whenever someone parks alone late at night, I keep an eye on them until they leave. I never want to feel that helpless again. My name is Jesse. I'm 23 and I work the overnight shift at a 24-hour laundromat. It's in a strip mall on the edge of town, squeezed between a dollar store and a closed-down restaurant. I've been working there for about 8 months now. The shifts are 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights it's completely dead. The laundromat isn't big, just 3 rows of washers and dryers, some folding tables, a couple of vending machines, and a counter where I sit. There's a bathroom in the back and a small storage closet where we keep detergent and cleaning supplies. The front wall is all glass, so you can see the parking lot and the street. At night, with the lights on inside, it feels like being in a fishbowl. Usually I get maybe 2 or 3 customers between midnight and 4 a.m., people who work weird hours or can't afford to do laundry during the day when the machines are more expensive. Most of them are fine, just tired people trying to get their clothes clean. This happened on a Wednesday night about 2 months ago. It was around 12:30 a.m. when a guy came in. He looked like he was in his early 40s, short brown hair, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He had a black garbage bag with him that I assumed was full of laundry. He walked past the counter without saying anything and went straight to a washer in the back row. I didn't think much of it. Some people just want to be left alone. I went back to reading an article on my phone. About 10 minutes later, I looked up and noticed he wasn't loading the washer. He was just sitting on the bench next to it with the garbage bag at his feet, staring at his phone. I thought maybe he was waiting for the washer to become available or something, but the whole place was empty except for us. Another 15 minutes went by. He still hadn't moved. He just sat there with his phone in his hand, but I noticed he wasn't really looking at it. His eyes kept flicking up toward me and then back down. Every time I glanced in his direction, I'd catch him looking. Around 1 a.m., I got up to refill the change machine. As I was walking past his row, he suddenly stood up. He asked me what time we closed. I told him we're 24 hours. He nodded slowly and then asked if I was the only one working. I said yes, but that my manager checks in randomly throughout the night. That was a lie, but I didn't like the way he was asking. He sat back down without loading the washer. I finished with the change machine and went back behind the counter. I tried to focus on my phone, but I couldn't stop glancing over at him. He was still just sitting there, not doing laundry, not on his phone, just sitting. At 1:30 a.m., another customer came in, an older woman with 2 baskets of laundry. She smiled at me and went to a washer near the front. I felt a little relieved to have someone else there. She started loading her clothes and I helped her get change for the machines. While I was helping her, I noticed the guy had moved. He wasn't in the back row anymore. I scanned the room and saw him standing near the bathroom hallway, just out of view from where the woman was. He was watching her. My heart started beating faster. I walked back behind the counter and kept my eyes on him. He stood there for maybe 5 minutes, then walked back to the bench and sat down again. The woman finished loading her washes and sat down at one of the folding tables with a magazine. I kept glancing between her and the guy. He stayed on the bench, but his eyes were on her the whole time. It was so obvious and uncomfortable that I was about to say something when the woman's phone rang. She answered it, talked for a minute, then stood up and walked outside. I watched through the glass as she got into a car that had pulled up and drove away. She left her laundry running. As soon as she left, the guy stood up. He walked over to the folding table where she'd been sitting and just stood there looking at her stuff. Then he turned and looked directly at me. I felt my stomach drop. I grabbed my phone and pretended to text someone, but I was really pulling up 911 just in case. He started walking toward the counter, slowly. His hands were in his hoodie pocket, and his face had no expression. He stopped about 5 feet from the counter and asked me if I needed something. He didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head slightly and then asked if I ever got scared working alone at night. I told him I was fine and asked again if he needed something. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. He said he was just curious about how things worked here, like if someone didn't come back for their laundry, what happened to it, or if someone caused trouble, how long it would take for help to arrive. I told him there were cameras everywhere and that the police station was only 2 blocks away. Another lie, but I wanted him to think I wasn't alone or vulnerable. He glanced up at the ceiling where the cameras were, then back at me. He shrugged and said he was just making conversation. Then he walked back to the bench and sat down. I was shaking at this point. I texted my roommate and told her what was happening. She said she'd call me in 5 minutes and to answer loudly so he could hear. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. The guy just sat there. The garbage bag was still at his feet, unopened. He never once tried to do laundry. My phone rang, and I answered loudly. I talked to my roommate like she was my boyfriend coming to pick me up. I said I'd be ready in 10 minutes and to just come inside when he got there. The guy's head snapped up when I said that. He stood up, grabbed the garbage bag, and walked toward the door. He stopped right before leaving and turned back to look at me one more time. Then he walked out into the parking lot. I watched through the glass as he got into a dark blue car that I hadn't even noticed was parked out there. He sat in the driver's seat for a minute, then started the car and drove away. I immediately called the police. I gave them a description of him and the car. They sent an officer over who took a report, but they said unless he actually threatened me or did something, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to call right away if he came back. He didn't come back that night, but 2 nights later, I saw the same blue car drive slowly past the laundromat around 1 a.m. It didn't stop, just drove by. Then it came back 20 minutes later and did the same thing. I called the police again, and they sent someone to patrol the area. The car didn't come back after that, at least not while I was working. I ended up quitting that job a month later. I told my boss I was moving, but really I just couldn't handle the anxiety anymore. Every time someone walked in late at night, I'd feel my chest tighten. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me and the questions he asked, the way he never actually did any laundry, but sat there for over an hour just watching. I don't know what he wanted, or what would have happened if I'd been there alone without that woman showing up, or if my roommate hadn't called. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out.
My name is Alan. I'm 31, and I work as a night security guard at a university library. It's a huge building, 4 floors, and it stays open 24 hours during finals week. My job is to walk the floors, make sure students aren't causing problems, and lock up the staff areas that close at midnight. Most nights during finals are busy until about 2 a.m., then it dies down to maybe 10 or 15 students scattered across the building. By 4 a.m., it's usually empty except for 1 or 2 people camped out with textbooks and coffee. This happened during finals week last semester. It was a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning,
Around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my rounds on the third floor when I noticed a guy sitting at one of the study carrels near the back corner. That section is pretty isolated, surrounded by old periodical stacks that nobody really uses anymore. He looked like he was in his late 20s, wearing a black jacket and a beanie. He had a laptop open in front of him, but I noticed he wasn't typing or reading. He was just staring at the screen. I didn't think much of it. Lots of students zone out when they're exhausted. I finished my round and went back down to the security desk on the first floor. About 30 minutes later, a female student came up to me. She looked nervous. She told me there was a guy on the third floor who had been staring at her for the past 20 minutes, and it was making her uncomfortable. I asked her to describe him, and she described the same guy I'd seen in the back corner. She said she'd been studying at a table near the windows, and he'd moved his seat twice to get closer to her. She tried moving to a different area, and he moved again about 10 minutes later. I told her I'd go check it out and asked her to wait at the desk. I took the stairs up to the third floor and walked toward the area she described. When I got there, I saw him sitting at a table about 15 feet away from where she'd been. His laptop was closed now, and he was just sitting there with his hands folded on the table. I walked over and asked if everything was okay. He looked up at me with this blank expression and said everything was fine. I told him another student had expressed concern and asked if he was actually studying or if he needed help finding something. He said he was just taking a break and thinking. I nodded and told him that if he wasn't actively using the space, he needed to move along. He stared at me for a few seconds without saying anything, then slowly stood up, packed his laptop into a backpack, and walked toward the stairs. I waited until he was gone and then went back downstairs to the security desk. I told the student that he'd left, and she thanked me. She went back upstairs to her spot. I sat back down at the desk and checked the security cameras. We have cameras on each floor covering the main areas, stairs, and entrances. I pulled up the third floor feed and rewound it to about 40 minutes earlier. I watched the footage of the guy moving his seat twice, exactly like the student had described. But what caught my attention was what happened before that. The footage showed him entering the third floor from the stairwell at around 1:45 a.m. He didn't go to the study carrel where I'd first seen him. He walked directly to the area where the student was sitting, looked at her, then walked away and sat down in a spot where he could see her. Then he moved closer, then closer again. I fast-forwarded to after I'd asked him to leave. The camera showed him walking down the stairs, but instead of leaving the building, he went to the second floor. I switched to that camera feed and saw him sitting in the study area there, just sitting, not studying, just waiting. I got up and walked up to the second floor. When I got there, he was gone. I checked the camera again and saw he'd moved back up to the third floor. I went back upstairs and found him in a different section near the back stairwell. This time, I didn't approach him calmly. I walked right up and told him he needed to leave the building. He asked why. I told him he wasn't here to study and he was making other students uncomfortable. He said that was ridiculous and he had every right to be there. I told him if he didn't leave, I'd call campus police. He stood up and got close to me, close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. He said I couldn't make him leave without a reason. I repeated that I'd call the police, and he finally backed off. He grabbed his backpack and walked toward the main stairwell. I followed him to make sure he actually left. He went out the front entrance, and I watched through the glass doors as he walked across the plaza toward the parking lot. I went back to the desk and called campus police anyway to report the incident. They said they'd send someone to patrol the area. I also made an announcement over the intercom that any students who felt unsafe should come down to the security desk. About 15 minutes later, another student came down, a different girl. She said she'd been on the fourth floor and noticed someone had been watching her through the gap in the bookshelves. She didn't get a good look at him, but she was freaked out enough to leave. My blood went cold. I checked the cameras for the fourth floor. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then I spotted movement in the far corner near the old archives section. It was him. He'd come back into the building through a side entrance that students used to access the annex. I radioed campus police with an update and told them he was back inside. Then I went up to the fourth floor. I found him in the archives section, standing between two shelves, looking out toward the study tables. I didn't say anything this time. I just pulled out my phone and took a picture of him. He saw me and immediately started walking toward the exit. I followed him, keeping a distance. He went down the back stairwell and out the side door.
Campus police were pulling up right as he walked out. They stopped him and asked for his student ID. He didn't have one. They asked for a regular ID and he refused. They ended up detaining him for trespassing. Turns out he wasn't a student at all. He'd just been coming into the library at night during finals week for the past 3 weeks. The police checked his backpack. There was no laptop, just a phone, a notebook, and a camera with a zoom lens. They arrested him, and I had to give a full statement. The university sent out an email the next day warning students about the incident. They also added more security to the night shift and installed additional cameras. I still work there, but now I'm hyper-aware of anyone who's sitting alone, not actually studying. The thing that gets me is how many times he'd probably been in there before that night, watching students, and nobody noticed. If that first girl hadn't said anything, he would have just kept doing it.
My name is Taylor. I'm 25 and I work at a drive-through coffee stand. It's one of those small, standalone buildings, just big enough for one person to fit inside with the espresso machine and register. It's in a parking lot off the highway, and we're open from 5 a.m. to midnight. I work the closing shift, 4 p.m. to midnight. During the evening, it's busy with people getting off work, but after 9 p.m., it's pretty slow. Maybe 1 or 2 cars an hour. The stand has windows on all 4 sides, so I can see in every direction, which usually makes me feel safe. But that also means anyone outside can see me. This started about 5 weeks ago. A truck started coming through around 10:30 p.m. every night. It was a dark red pickup, kind of beat up, with a dented front bumper. The driver was a guy in his 50s, maybe older, with a gray beard and a baseball cap. The first few times he came through, he ordered a black coffee and didn't say much, just handed me cash, took his coffee, and left. Normal. But then he started staying longer at the window. He'd make small talk, ask me how my night was going, comment on the weather. Still normal, just chatty. But then it started getting weird. He began asking personal questions, like where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, what kind of car I drove. I gave vague answers and tried to stay professional, but he kept pushing. One night, he asked what time I got off work. I lied and told him I never worked alone and that someone was always in the back. There's no back. The stand is literally one room. After that, he started showing up twice a night, once around 10:30, then again right before midnight when I was closing. He'd order coffee, sit in his truck in the parking lot for 10 or 15 minutes drinking it, then drive away right as I was locking up. I mentioned it to my manager and she said to just be polite but firm and not engage with personal questions. She said if he made me uncomfortable, I could refuse service. But part of me felt like I was overreacting. He hadn't actually done anything threatening. He was just weird. Then, about 2 weeks ago, he came through at his usual time and asked if I wanted to go get a drink sometime after my shift. I told him no thank you, that I had a boyfriend. He didn't seem upset, he just said okay, smiled, and drove off. The next night, he didn't come through at all. Neither did he the night after that. I felt relieved, like maybe he finally got the hint. But then on the third night, he came back. Only this time, he didn't come through the drive-thru. He parked his truck in the lot facing the stand and just sat there. I could see him through the window. He wasn't on his phone or eating or doing anything. He was just sitting there, looking at the stand, at me. It was 11 p.m. and there were no other cars around. I called my manager, but she didn't answer. I thought about calling the police, but again, he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. He was just parked in a public lot. So I decided to just ignore him and focus on cleaning up for closing. But every time I looked up, he was still there. At 11:30, another car came through, and I felt a wave of relief. I took their order, made their drink, and handed it to them. As they drove away, I glanced back at the truck. He was still there. At 11:45, I started closing procedures. I shut down the espresso machine, counted the cash drawer, and turned off the menu board lights. The whole time, I kept looking at the truck. He still hadn't moved. At 11:55, I was ready to lock up and leave. My car was parked about 30 feet away from the stand in a spot that was well lit. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and my phone. I turned off the inside lights and stepped out, locking the door behind me. As soon as I stepped out, I heard a truck door open. My heart dropped. I looked over and saw him getting out of his truck. He started walking towards me. I sped-walked to my car, unlocked it with the key fob, and got in as fast as I could. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. He was still walking towards me. He got to my car right as I was putting it in reverse. He knocked on my window. I didn't roll it down. I didn't even look at him. I just backed out and drove away. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I checked my rearview mirror and saw him standing there in the parking lot watching me drive away. I called the police as soon as I got home. I gave them a description of him and his truck and the license plate number. They said they'd increase patrols in that area and told me to call immediately if he showed up again. The next night at work, I was terrified. My manager finally called me back and I told her everything. She said she'd try to have someone else work with me for the rest of the week, but we were short-staffed, so she couldn't promise anything. Around 10 p.m., a police car pulled into the lot and parked near the stand. The officer came up to the window and said they'd be doing regular check-ins throughout the night. I felt so relieved I almost cried. The truck didn't show up that night, or the next night, but on the third night, I saw it drive slowly past the parking lot around 11 p.m. It didn't pull in, just slowed down as it passed, then kept going. I called the police and they sent someone right away. The officer drove around the area but didn't find the truck. He stayed in the lot until I closed and then followed me to my car to make sure I got out safely. That was 2 weeks ago. The truck hasn't come back since, but I don't feel safe anymore. Every car that pulls through after 10 p.m. makes me jumpy. I keep pepper spray in my pocket now, and I never stay late. As soon as the clock hits midnight, I lock up and leave, even if I'm not totally done cleaning. My manager is trying to find someone to work the closing shift with me, but until then, I just have to deal with it. The worst part is not knowing what he wanted. Was he just lonely and awkward, or was he waiting for the right moment to do something? I don't know, and I really don't want to find out.